Carl Munson of Expats Portugal here, and this is number 11 of 1,000 things to enjoy in Portugal. Portuguese coffee may not be the best in the world, but it could well be the most consistently excellent, I was once told. Now, clearly best is subjective, but coffee is in the very veins of life in Portugal, and that's a fact. Its basic unit, the caffeine-bearing bottom line, is an espresso standardised nationally and globally as its own brand called Portuguese coffee, with a unique set of characteristics, culture, and even roasting processes. Unlike some countries that insist on 100% Arabica beans, the Portuguese espresso is obtained from a blend of slow-roasted Arabica and Robusta beans, and therefore less acidic, strong in aroma, and with more body and sweetness. King João V would be proud of his legacy as introducer of coffee from the former Portuguese colony of Brazil. Hola, bon dia, Carl Munson here with the Good Morning Portugal show from expatsportugal.com. We made it, folks. We are past Blue Monday, that day of the year when the travel companies and the holiday companies tell you how miserable you are, such that they can sell you a holiday. Did you book a holiday yesterday? Probably not. Or did you think to yourself, I know, I'm going to treat myself to a week in the conservatory? What else can we do but make light of this situation this morning? How are you? Let me know who you are, where you are, and how you're doing this morning. Very good. Good to see that. I was not going to try and pronounce your second name. I'm just going to say Joel. Safiro is here from Porto because we have an economist, a real live economist joining us this morning with years of experience in the said business of being an economist, who responded to something Joel and I were talking about in quite an old geezer sort of way. EU, better in the old days. And Kate dropped me a line to challenge that line of thought, and we have her here on the show with us this morning. I think she's just fixing up another cup of cha for herself. We were both talking before we came on air. Funny enough, before I played you that video about coffee and throwing in the controversial idea that Portuguese coffee might not be the best in the world. But I hope you think I redeemed myself with what I went on to say about Portuguese coffee in that video. That's one of our shorts. That's number 11 of 1,000 things to enjoy in Portugal. So do check those out on our YouTube channel, and we will have a quick look at the weather and say a few hellos this morning until Kate is ready to join us after a second stiff cup of Assam tea, which is, I believe, her morning favourite. Okay, so let's do some hellos. That's more important than the weather, isn't it? But the weather is important, and we'll come back to that. Hank in California, one day to go to inauguration in the States there, obviously, Hank. Hope everybody plays nicely. Yay, good morning from California, says Hank. Nick Steinman in the UK. Bon dia to you, Nick. How are you doing this morning? And from Moscow in Russia. Bon dia to you, Carolyn. Isn't this great? And Lee McGrady, who was with us last night. Folks, we have a gardening show now as part of our Expats Portugal deck of cards. Why didn't I do that before? Why didn't I think to do a gardening program? Monday nights now, 6 o'clock, working with the Air team, who are now called the Fresh Air team. My friends over there in the UK, who I've been working on a project with on a Monday evening from 6 till 7. We're doing a bit of broadcasting and podcasting and interviewing, and we've evolved that from the Air team into the Fresh Air team, which is now a gardening program. Get out and grow. Hashtag get out and grow. That's our thing. We're encouraging people to grow their own food and get a bit of fresh air. Ideal during the lockdown. And Lee was a real trooper last night, a gardener who's settled in Portugal and was helping us with a few gardening inquiries. I'm hoping he's going to stick around and be part of the team on a Monday evening in his man cave just outside the house there, advising on all matters to do with gardening. And he's saying, good morning, sharpening the chainsaws, blades before work starts. Wow, that's how a lumberjack starts the day. And he goes to the lavatory, probably. Paul Williams, morning from a grey and cool Cabarras de Tavira. Hello, Paul. How are you? Is that South African sunshine? But or is that South Algarve? I don't know. Tell us what SA means in this context, Paul. How are you? Great to have you back on the comments here this morning. I hope you're feeling great today. We are past Blue Monday, as I said. The only way is up, as Gary said yesterday. Hola, bon dia. Bon dia from a wet and miserable North Wales from Elsa. How you doing? Peter Bleach. Peter, thank you so much for your beautiful message yesterday. Sorry I didn't get a chance to respond to it. Monday's pretty crazy and busy, but I felt it right in my heart, I did. And thank you so much for that. And I'm so delighted to hear of your good news. So bon dia to you as well. What a lovely morning. Our Blue Monday was the best ever. Funny that, isn't it? everything is upside down at the moment, including Blue Monday. Bon dia. Nice one, Pete and Diane. Bon dia, greetings from Lisboa, from Andre Ajande. Hey, Andre, fairly new to this community, and you're very welcome. As everybody is here in our efforts to hear people and help people, as I think is our latest kind of motto, which the doc, I wonder where he is this morning, but he translated that into the Latin, which, forgive me, I forget now. And we had a Portuguese translation of To Hear You and To Help You, which Philomena Friday will be back, not this Friday, but the Friday after. So bon dia to you, Philomena. Thank you for agreeing to come back, and your kind comments as well yesterday. Philomena, of course, occasionally sings on the show, among her many other gifts and contributions and positivity that she brings. So this coming Friday, these are the what's-ons that I forgot yesterday, but this coming Friday, I have a lovely lady coming to tell us about yoga for children. And I do have the yoga age of a child, so I'm going to enjoy that on Friday. And then the week after, Philomena Friday again, and be learning more about the language and the culture. Philomena's so brilliant. All those things you've been saving up that you're too afraid to ask about Portuguese language or culture, it's safe to ask Philomena. And it's the same thing. If anything you've ever wanted to ask an economist but have been too afraid to ask, Kate is here. to answer that baby as well. Kate, just a few more. Oh, actually, you could join me on the screen. There's no point keeping you hanging about there in the green room. Good morning to you, Kate. How are you?
Tea.
It was you, wasn't it, who was asking where we could get a Sam tea in Portugal? I think. Were you able to replenish your? Did you manage to find?
Only loose tea, not tea bags. So I'm going to have to get the old-fashioned paraphernalia when our UK supplies are finished.
Oh, of course. Okay, well, good luck with that. Assam, of course, is the king of teas, is it not?
It is. It is. If you love black tea and strong tea, this is the best. Thank God for India.
Yes, I feel like standing up and saluting. But yeah, it is. I think it's what people euphemistically call English breakfast tea. I think is mainly made of Assam, isn't it? So Kate here to talk about the economy or economics, a bit of both, and we'll see how that goes. And of course, her own expat journey while she's here in Portugal. But we'll just say a few more hellos because this is really important part of what we do here. We have feel the virtual hug of the Good Morning Portugal community every morning. Bon dia to you, Louise, Solar 50 Plus Expat Portugal. Subscribe. How are you doing, Louise? Bon dia todos from a very wet Nottingham, from Michelle Castro Vieira over there in the UK. Yeah, I saw that. You've got Depression Christoph or Hurricane Christoph. The tail end of that may well touch Portugal, of course, as well. Wet weather is forecast here. Paulo Mendes is here as well. Bon dia to you. Portuguese coffee may not be the best in the world, but it's definitely better than what Americans call Starbucks. Oh, telling it like it is, as usual, Joel there in Porto. What I went on to say that Portuguese coffee, and this is not my quote, how the video starts is, Portuguese coffee may not be the best in the world, but it is the most consistently excellent. And that is what I would agree with, because best is very subjective. And you'll get all of these, coffee aficionados telling you that coffee beans chewed by a goat up a tree and then pooed out and brewed into coffee, forgive my language at this time of the morning, is the best coffee in the world. Who wants to go through that process? I don't. But I think it's fair to say coffee in Portugal is consistently good wherever you go around the country. That's the remarkable thing about it. Druba in Sintra, morning from a cloudy Sintra, from Sintra's farming family. He's got a lovely Airbnb over there. Don't forget, folks, if you want to see Sintra and at the same time enjoy some beautiful Nepalese hospitality, go see Druba. Louise, I'd love to join the gardening show. It's the reason I chose Portugal. We launched it yesterday. Get out and grow is the hashtag for us as new people, I think, are supported in their growing journey, and a few of the old timers, a few of the experienced gardening people help them out, because I think that's what's needed. Bon dia from Marcos Valbon. What is that? Is that a sheep, a cat, or a bath with an integral shower and that emoji? Not sure. Marcos, explain yourself. How have you checked with Garvo that get out and grow isn't already his nature walk catchphrase? Ooh, misses. Thank you, Pete. Bon dia. Gary's not here to defend himself. Let's not give him too much banter this morning. Bon dia, classic Algarve question. Your fresh orange juice is extra pulp or no pulp. Yes, of course it is. The first thing people say to each other in the Algarve of a morning. For me, I think it's got to be pulpy. Okay. Yes. Anyone else care to answer that? We'll ask Kate in a minute. Well, yes, we love spending time in Kruger National Park in South Africa. Okay, so it's South African sunshine. Some people will be happy with some Portuguese sunshine. Paul's gone a stage further, looking for South African sunshine this morning. Can't blame him, really. Mark Hay, morning from Tavira, tried to make pizza in the ancient dome oven we inherited. That is an exciting moment when you crank up some of the old infrastructure on your quinta. And this is what happened here. What happened? Let's find out how that turned out. We inherited with the property last night, but ended up having midnight pizzas from the kitchen oven. Too many holes. I think it does end up like that far too often. Sorry to hear that, Mark. You've got a bit of pointing to do. And not just pointing at the oven in the kitchen. I mean, pointing at the outside oven. And it will be worth it. Bon dia from Atlanta, from Victoria. Yes, like I said earlier on, a day to go before the inauguration. Play nicely, everybody. Morning from Chile, Florida. From Ree. And a final comment for now, anyway. You can't beat an abatonado. Very good. Nick, I see what you did there. The many coffees of Portugal, I think, what did I put on the screen? There are about 15 of them, but there are many more than that. One of them, my favorites that made me giggle when I first arrived here, was the Café Constipado, which is not a laxative or anything like that. It's actually, constipado means cold or a bit of congestion of the upper end of the body. And it's a coffee. What is it the Italians call it? An affogato. The Café Constipado is the affogato of Portugal. Okay, Kate. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Carl.
Thank you for bearing with us. We have to say hello to all of our community here. And if
Absolutely.
I take us back, me and Joel and I, to use English correctly, we're talking about the old days of Portugal, the agrarian past, when everything was better before those bureaucrats at the EU started sticking their beaks in. And you dropped me an email to point to one or two things out that may not be quite right, a little bit too romantic, possibly. Can we start there? What did you take offence to in us old giffers going on like that?
Well, rather than just talking about what I took offense from, I'll just quote you a World Bank report from the late 1970s, which said that from the mid-50s, when about half of the population worked in agriculture, either full or part-time, to 20 years later in the mid-50s. Okay, so this is way before the EU, Joel. And one of the very sorry things was that as everybody was working in more high value added jobs that earned more in the cities, and not investing in agriculture in a meaningful way with better equipment and modern production methods, Portugal could not feed itself. Portugal spent almost all of its foreign reserves in the 70s and early 80s buying food from abroad because it couldn't feed itself. That was the truth. Now then, if we fast forward to 86, when Portugal acceded to the EU, even before it acceded, it was getting help, lots of monetary help from the EU. That collective help over the years has been something on the order of 3% of gross domestic product. That is additional money that built all sorts of wonderful infrastructure in terms of water treatment, in terms of roads, in terms of energy facilities. Because I don't know how many of you came here sort of in the mid-80s, but the first time I came here, I was here. And all these marvelous roads and water treatment and all these things that you take for granted now, ultra-modern, weren't here. So I shared the road with lots of donkeys and carts, which I'm sure Joel romantically remembers. But that was the problem. So we now have a Portugal that is, in European terms, a modern economy, a developed economy. around 2% of GDP is agricultural. And although the smallest number of people ever work in agriculture, the agricultural output of Portugal is the highest ever. In fact, in the past about 10 years, it's grown nearly 3 times. So this is a phenomenal agricultural story. Fewer people, lots more production. Portugal can not only feed itself, but it exports to the rest of the EU. So I consider that a very happy story. And I know that that 100% contradicts what your conversation was about on that evening. Now, there's something else I would like to talk about.
Please.
Why the Euroscepticism, okay?
Yep.
So the Portuguese were very passionately positive about being EU members until the global financial crisis. And during the global financial crisis, a number of Mediterranean countries were very hard hit, which is not to say that all Western economies weren't hard hit. But Portugal actually had to go into special measures along with Ireland, along with Greece, along with Spain, Italy, and they resented the austerity hugely.
Yes.
Now, you know, those programs were, I think the program ended in sort of 2015, 14, but it left a bitter taste in many people's mouths in Portugal, understandably, in the same way that the Scots represent, well, let's say there are a lot of people that really resent the austerity that was imposed by governments in Westminster. Mm-hmm. Very, very similar. And so while you have seen very, very strong growth in Portugal up until pandemic year last year, in fact, much stronger than average in the rest of the EU. And you've seen a huge reduction in unemployment, massive reduction, and virtually no inflation. You still have some residual resentments and things from people that don't keep up with the economic data.
Yes, and that's an interesting that you put it like that. That don't keep up with the data, because I suppose what we've got here to give the context is the data. It's a bit like the pandemic, isn't it? The pandemic is a public health challenge, and when it's managed by data and numbers, it's a very different thing to the individual experience of people. And I suppose that it really is the heart of the pain of politics, isn't it? Is that on the top level, where the data and the numbers are, and you're dealing with numbers of people and a kind of conceptual view, a numerical view of the world, society, and people, you get one sense of the world, don't you? And then at the other end of things, or a different context of where people actually live and have their lives and feel that resentment about austerity, it's very difficult for anyone who's suffered at the wrong side of that data to understand the bigger picture of how things have improved. So I totally get what you're saying. On the numbers level, there's no argument. You can't argue with what you've just said, really. I'm sure someone can argue with that, but generally speaking, it's hard.
Let them try, is all I can say.
All right.
One other thing I have to mention.
Of course.
In the good old days, Joel, 1970, Portugal had per person national income that was pretty much the same as Mexico. Okay? Mexico in 1970 and Portugal in 1970, approximately the same.
Yes.
Now, a completely different story, okay? And particularly when you look at how unequal Mexican society is compared to, and incomes are compared to Portugal. So it's just another way that I would say that despite the challenges, most of us and most of the people in Portugal have in the good old days in the last 20 years.
Yeah. And you've almost got me feeling sorry for politicians here, because what I can see is the case is that a politician might, and a civil servant might say, look, we've made it so much better, and people will say, but it's not good enough. So is that a sort of layman's way of looking at this? Is that things have improved massively, but it's also true that whatever it is, €685 a month is a terrible minimum wage to be having in Europe, but it's still much better than a Mexican wage. I was going to say a Mexican wage of the 1970s. Is that where we're at? Is that, yeah, it is so much better, and the numbers you give show that, but you're not denying that it could still be a lot better, and people sometimes do have a justifiable beef with how they perceive the overarching effects of the EU.
Absolutely. I don't think they should have a beef with the overarching effects of the EU, because the EU have just been plowing money into Portugal, and they're about to plow over 3.5, I think it was 3.665 or something percent of GDP every single year for the next budgetary cycle. Yeah. So Portugal is going to be a huge beneficiary. Where I agree with people is, I think, and this is something I don't quite understand, because it's in the political DNA, not in the economics DNA. But I think Portugal has been incredibly timid about its fiscal stimulus during this pandemic. And that's what I don't understand. Portugal, like many other countries in the EU, is borrowing money in the markets to help stimulate the economy, to prop up people's jobs. Do you know what rate of interest they're paying? Negative. They're being paid, and most of the bonds are just snapped up. So last week there was a huge government bond auction. Every single bond disappeared and could have been sold 3 times over. So I look at this and I see no sense in providing the kind of half-hearted measures. I really think that a bit of helicopter money would be very helpful right now. That is, everybody below a certain income level getting a certain amount of money, maybe €2,000 in their bank account. It would make a huge difference.
That sounds familiar.
That's the Biden way, yeah?
That's a bit of borrowed policy, isn't it? So the suggestion you're making there, by the sound of it, is that the bonds could have been sold over and over. More money could be pumped into the economy if so chosen. Have you figured out why that hasn't been the case? And is it not
something to do with politics, Carl? Because because I have only been here for a couple of months, and I've spent most of it studying and working, because I'm kind of switching careers, or emphasis in my career. I haven't been assiduously learning the language, and so the subtleties of political reporting completely escape me. But it seems to me that there is a political hangover from previous years, and certain parts of the coalition have previously been accused of profligacy, and that Portugal is still concerned about its reputation after having to go through the IMF stroke EU programs from the global financial crisis. But from a just objective point of view of what I'm seeing right now, it makes no sense to me. I think they need more stimulus, and I certainly don't understand raising taxes, and I don't understand the taxation of electric cars here. If you're going to encourage people to buy an electric car, you could do like happens in most of the rest of European countries and actually incentivize people.
Yes, there's definitely a Portuguese problem with that sort of hobbling of good policy, it would seem. So on the one hand, let's encourage this, but then on the other hand, let's tax it to death so it doesn't quite get off the ground. I've definitely seen that, and I share with you. I don't know where you would put your political age your political mental age in terms of the Portuguese culture. I think I'm about a 6-year-old now. When I watch the news, I feel like a 6-year-old. I imagine you would be a bit more mature than me, with your standing knowledge on these things. So Hank makes a good point. If you're going to tell people to stay at home and businesses to shutter, you damn well better pay them. I think that's absolutely right, Hank, that you can't stop people earning a living and then not look after them. They're still fining and demanding with all these tax bills. That seems so terribly unfair, and it's bound to cause a lot of resentment. Also, I notice, Kate, you're making a distinction between politics and economics. That's a distinction not meant.
It's very distinct.
Yeah, but it's not one that lay people make, is it? For the rest of us, those two things get cut. I think so. I think that's part of this confusion. And part of the reason you're here this morning is that a lot of people imagine the economy and economics to be the realm of politicians, and they just constantly mess it up, which probably hides the excellence and skills of people like yourself, whilst the politicians are just screwing it up with the data that they're given from you.
I understand you, Carl, now. And yes, you're absolutely right. We as economists can do our very best to take a look at the issues, try and come up with a set of solutions or things to make policies that will make problems less severe. Yeah. But it's up to politicians to adopt them, to fund them properly, and to carry them out. And so it is the politicians that are not very enthusiastic on actually adopting what we economists recommend in most cases. And by the way, the 200, the checks, as they are called in the US at the moment, and my suggestion of money to each person below a certain income level, that was actually thought up by the most conservative neoclassical economists of the mid-20th century, Milton Friedman. He said, when you're in a situation like this, you need helicopter money. That's what he called it. Yeah. It's like you drop money out of the skies to give people purchasing power. And that's what is needed. If people have purchasing power, then at least domestic demand can continue to create activity, keep people in jobs, even that, for the moment can't be done, but will be needed in the future.
Yep, I get it. And isn't it funny how what you might imagine to be a sort of left-leaning policy, a socialistic policy, was created by a classic right-leaning economist, or loved by the right anyway. And that's the order of the day at the moment. I think people's political understanding and belief is being massively challenged. And maybe that's not a bad thing. Let's have a look. If I can make a really difficult a metaphor here and take a look at the meteorological economy, the supply and demand of rain and sunshine. I might have really messed that up with my limited understanding of the economics. But let's just very quickly, and we'll find out where you are in Portugal as well, and why you got to be here, and then return to this fabulous discussion about the economy and economics specifically of Portugal. But look, 7 degrees and foggy in the capital. And I'm just looking really, because yesterday and on Monday, we like to look ahead for the rest of the week. It's not changed, folks. I mean, that's why the economy is like the weather, I suppose, because it does seem to change. And sometimes quite drastically in a surprising way. 6 degrees in Porto, still lots of rain forecast for the rest of the week, very cloudy there. Coimbra, central Portugal, still a nice high to look forward to of 17 degrees by the end of the week, but cloudy and rainy. And down there in the south, sorry, Paul, it's not going to be very South African down there. 11 degrees and broken clouds at the moment, but a high of 15 to look forward to towards the end of the week. So, not ideal. Poor weather coming. Well, it depends which way you look at it. A bit like the economy, I guess, as well. Kate Gimblett is here, and a real economist. This is a rare thing for us to be able to talk to a real live economist here on the Good Morning Portugal show. And it all began because of some romantic reminiscing about the old days and how good it was when we were all poor and lived off the land. And it must drive people mad who really know about these things. But presumably you do understand that sentiment as well, Kate. It is human nature, isn't it, to think that things were better in the old days, and the economists and the politicians are just messing everything up and they're just causing problems that we're gonna have to deal with later on. Isn't that the difficulty with helicopter money, and maybe why the Portuguese government are being a bit conservative, if you like, is that they recognise that might inflate things if you just drop money on everybody, and that it's our children and grandchildren that are going to have to pick up the tab for that.
Well, all of that's, I'm afraid, incorrect thinking that has been adopted by politicians that, want to get away with beliefs that they have for political reasons. First of all,
Okay.
a country is not like a household. When a country borrows, it's not like borrowing on your credit card. That is a big lie. Now, at EU level, the EU would actually like Portugal to have a more stimulative response.
Yeah.
They want the entirety of Europe to grow and succeed. And if you have political reasons for reluctance, after Christine Lagarde and the head of the IMF are saying, if there's ever an economy and support your population, it's now. Well, it's kind of interesting to see the resistance. And it's not just Portugal, it's not just Portugal. People in the political classes, many of them have they've had one class in economics. The worst thing is seeing the UK where, most of the politicians did something called politics, economics, and philosophy at Oxford, which meant they took about 2 classes in economics and learnt only the most rudimentary, sort of baby stuff, and nothing about modern economics, nothing indeed that we've learnt in the last 100 years, which is a little depressing because a little knowledge can be a very dangerous thing. And that's all these people have. So anyway, it is, under certain conditions, really important to borrow and spend to stimulate. When you're in a deflationary pandemic situation, you owe it to people to support them, to get them through, so that you have have been addressed. There was some other part of your contention that I meant to address, but I've forgotten now because I haven't had enough tea.
I know. I'm sure it will return, and as I hope you will from time to time, as our new resident economist here on the Good Morning Portugal and Expats Portugal community. I'm really enjoying talking to you because it is challenging my standing beliefs, and I've got even less political and economic education than those buffoons in Westminster at the moment. So I can't really throw stones, even though I do agree with you. So Marcos, just to go back to our lovely community here and their comments, and there are some questions here and some observations from what we've said so far, or what you've said mainly, I think. That was for a bathing. That was a bathing emoji. We've been invited into Marcos's bathroom this morning by the look of it. Hetal Thakra, bon dia from Porto. Good morning to you, Hetal. And this is Weave the Story, Roy's Gajinho, I think. Good afternoon from sunny Singapore. Good afternoon to you, Roy. And Singapore, of course, held up as a great model of an outstanding economy and a country with great infrastructure. Morning, just reading about Galp. This is a political economic problem for Portugal, of course. They've closed the refinery, or certainly the processing plant that they have up there in Matosinhos near Porto. Some refinement of oil is cheaper in the Far East, and the petrochemical products are being handed over. Cepsa Repsol in Spain are taking care of that by the sound of it. As I understand, this is being funded by the EU. You might get a sense of where Gary stands on this. The mere mention of the EU and Portugal's economy has Louise saying this is going to be fun. And I think that the idea that you might be kicking my butt is also fun to some people, I think. Kate, with your greater understanding. Okay, Susan Renshaw, good morning, one and all. Peter saying, yeah, this is an interesting comment. The roads, dams, and internet. I thought he was going to say lies, lies, and statistics, but he said the roads, dams, and internet coverage is so much better than that of France or Spain. In Pete's observation of Portugal so far. Hello to Singapore. Singaporean. That is Weave the Story. I beg your pardon. I'm confusing people here, but we've got Weave the Story here, YouTuber this morning. What a fantastic turnaround with agriculture, says Hank. And it sounds like it. It definitely sounds like it, doesn't it? Putting the nostalgia to one side. That's it's great. In the comments now, we get a lot of people talking to each other, and I don't think I should be reading those out. My village is surrounded by towers of fruit grates. There's a lot of apple growing, so yes, this is the more bang for buck in the agricultural industry, I guess, that we're seeing now in Portugal. And here we go. Look, Pete's saying Singapore is an amazing example to follow. What an infrastructure! Anyone who's been there as a tourist, I think, would agree. And again, there's a confusion of economics and politics with Singapore, because a lot of people who might like the air-conditioned splendor of Singapore might not like some of its more what they would see as right-wing totalitarian political systems. But that's a good note we've made this morning, not to confuse economics with politics. That's a note to self for me, for sure. Let's have a look. Roy, I guess it's easy for us as a nation. The nation is rich and small with an efficient government. That is also true of Singapore, isn't it? It's an easier situation to manage, perhaps. Jacqueline Claire Bendel, good morning to you. Bon dia to you, Claire. How are you doing? Okay. Yes, Louise, we do want to see more videos from you. She says, I'm so behind trying to catch up. What a great community. Yes, we'd love to see more of your videos, Louise, absolutely. And let's talk to you on the screen sometime. Okay, so here we are with Gary's comment now about, I think this is more of the sort of EU skepticism that we might put to bed, or maybe not. We'll see this morning. Roads that no one uses. Very expensive electricity, a country deep in debt. In UK, fishermen and farmers paid not to work. The common agricultural policy is laughable and is favourable to large corporations that keep up with EU regulations. Small producers go out of business. So who got most of the money? Is this, again, the collapsing of economics and politics? You can't blame economics for corruption, can you?
Well, I certainly wouldn't. But I have to say that Gary's interpretation of the evidence is very different to mine. And in fact, one of the issues, long-standing issues with the Common Agricultural Policy is that it was designed to keep small French farmers afloat. And yes, it does, in its more modern manifestations, benefit large farms, because it is paid by the amount of land that is farmed. And not all categories of agriculture are treated equally under the Common Agricultural Policy. Nevertheless, the idea that UK fishermen and farmers are paid not to work is absurd. Ask a farmer, ask a fisherman. Right now, they're working and they can't sell their goods because they can't get them across the border. And the fishermen from Scotland are having to sail to Denmark to offload their catches. And farmers, well, they're going to face a lot of challenges. So, they don't know what the policy is going to be for subsidizing them in the future. Yeah. I think there's a lot of misinformation about the Common Agricultural Policy. I
don't know if everyone's experiencing this, Kate, but your line
focused in recent years is information.
Oh, you're better now. You're better now. Sorry, a lot of that I lost. I don't know if it was me, but I think a misinterpretation of the Common agricultural policy is what I heard there. While we see if it is your line and let that settle down for a moment, Andrew Paul Thompson, belated bon dia from Aquitaine, talking in France, waiting for my PCR test. Good luck with that. Hi, Kate. Question: what do you think of the monoculture, chemical dependency, and water deprivation of that land used for all the agricultural progress? So, okay, it's come at a cost.
I'm very concerned about that. In fact, what I'm doing at the moment is I'm doing what will hopefully be 3 different certifications in climate risk management, climate finance risk management, because what we have seen is a reduction in biodiversity in many places in Europe and all over the world. The use of chemicals which are damaging to water supplies, too much nitrogen. There are different, more efficient, more sustainable ways of producing the same amount of food. And we have to see that happen. And I'm kind of hoping that I'll be able to be part of that change, because in the end, most serious agricultural operations do rely on funding from banks. And I'm hoping to be able to advise banks on their climate finance risk.
Oh, excellent.
We've got the European taxonomy. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can, yeah.
Europe has got new rules that are going to kick in June. Got workmen outside. I've got to tell them to go away.
No, it's all right. It's okay. I mean, we can cope with that. It's Portuguese life. Actually, while Kate's doing that, let's read a few more comments that don't directly relate to her or aren't questions. Oh, it's fine, Kate. This is a lovely insight into what were you shooing them away, were you? And it's a very nice little vignette of Portuguese life. Go down the garden. Okay, that old euphemism. Where are you in Portugal? Which part of Portugal have you ended up in, and why?
We are in Sela Nova in Alcobaça municipality, which is
wonderful.
It's Leiria district, but we're kind of in the middle, and it's beautiful. We're on a hilltop. And we're a short distance from some wonderful beaches, which we tend to go walking on at the weekends. And we enjoy the nature around here. There's trees everywhere. It's just beautiful. And, our main towns are Alcobaça and Caldas. Both are delightful.
Yeah.
Not that there's much open that we can use.
Sure.
At the moment. How was it chosen? First of all, I both my partner and I did not want to lose the right to live and work in Europe, in the East. On the wall, I said, right. And most of our clients are in the UK, who has the same time zone. That's Ireland and Portugal. So then I thought, okay, where sounds good in Portugal? And so I did a bit of research, and I thought, Silver Coast sounds awfully nice. Sounds an awful lot like where I was born, which was in California. And indeed, it's very like California. I feel totally at home here. Except for the language.
Yes. How lovely then. So for Americans looking to settle somewhere in Portugal, that comparison is very helpful, I'm sure. So back to the economy and economics. That's why Kate's here this morning. And I'm really enjoying our conversation. You changed my mind for sure here. I'm not sure about Joel. I don't agree for one simple reason. The government, Portuguese governments never manage or even control their spending, and that's ultimately would end for its citizens to pay the bill. This is the problem, isn't it, that people fear, is that they are going to pick up the tab of government incompetence. But again, that's to do with the collapsing of political behavior and economic theory, isn't it? A distinction which we've managed to make, I think, this morning.
First of all, most debt never gets paid off. That's pointless. It's absolutely pointless. And may I point out that when it does, it's kind of remarkable and often much later. For instance, World War One was in the UK was funded by something called undated consols. And they were still out there being bought and sold until a few years ago.
Yeah.
But now that the UK can borrow even cheaper than the consols, there was no point in keeping them. But none of that debt, and most of that debt can just be rolled over, by which I mean, and this is what all governments do, when debt becomes due, you issue new debt and you pay off the old. And it is absolutely incorrect to think of an economy as being the same as a household, that something ultimately has to get paid off. That's not the way it works. Governments actually, banking systems create money, banking systems. So when a bank makes a loan to you, you may think that's somebody else's money they're lending to you, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's money that they create by lending it to you. And it is the way policy is set in central banks that determines how much money they create. And how much money you demand is dependent on how you see your prospects for paying it off, because unlike a government and a bank, you can't create your own money as an individual. There's a sharp contrast, and people don't make the distinction, and a lot of politicians mislead them because they
a bit of a Ponzi scheme, and if you keep inflating like that and creating money, it's all going to crash down, which we've seen in history. Can we return to that later? But this thing about how an economy is not the same as a household economy. There was one famous British politician who made that analogy, and this might be another reason this might be another reason for people to despise her, misleading people like that. So you mean to say that the money that got borrowed to fight the First and Second World Wars wasn't paid off? It was just met with new debt.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's news to me. I do have this model of the global economy, the national economies being like a household. So Margaret Thatcher was wrong to make that analogy, and it was a political sleight of hand to get in the hearts and minds of some people to bring about her political will, and it wasn't.
Correct.
Wow. Okay. Right. Okay. You can see the scales falling from my eyes and my consciousness about these subjects right now. I don't know if that's news to anybody else who's watching. This is absolutely fascinating to me anyway. UBI during the pandemic is the moral thing to do. And there's been a lot of talk of universal basic income. Andrew Yang, the Democrat in America, was kind of polling and canvassing on that ticket, wasn't it? And it looks like it's coming through a different way, perhaps. Yes, Hank, says Andrew Paul Thompson. A lot of people do want to see UBI. Then others fear it's just going to be utter dependency on the government, who are going to make you do terrible things for your money or stop you from doing other things you want to do. Let's have a look. Carla's worked so hard and made a really lovely community and had been a real tonic during these difficult times. Oh, thank you, Peter. Very nice, very kind of you to say. Janet, what strikes me in Portugal is the big difference between pay in private employees and civil servants. That's the same the world over, isn't it? This is also the case in most EU countries, but the difference is not that big. You may or may not want to comment on that. And we might sort of generalize that, Kate. I think that's the case with most governments. And this is true, I think. We have to be careful here whether we are speaking specifically about the problems of the Portuguese economy and political behavior here, or whether that's just a general sort of human nature and politics thing. Andrew Paul Thompson, yes, politics, it's the economy stupid, that famous quote. We're never far away from that, are we? The fact that when Portugal, 1 year after the Carnation Revolution, after the transition of power from the military to the new government, had Troika here under Mario Soares up until then. Economical stability of the state was an established responsibility, not the case after 75. Joel also has a bit of a fond eye about how well the military seemed to run the country until it was handed to the politicians who messed it all up. We may want to comment on that as well. No such thing as free money. Someone pays for it somewhere. That, to me, it might be being challenged this morning. We might be looking at money in a new way as a lubricant rather than this household model. It looks like you want to say something to that, Kate.
Well, yes. I mean, it's such a widespread misconception because it's almost like a conspiracy on the part of government, and particularly conservative governments, until they have some sort of political motivation for turning on the taps. And then suddenly, behold. So when Donald Trump decided to turn on the taps, there was 2 trillion available, mostly for wealthy people. And when Rishi Sunak decided to turn on the taps and give everybody support through furloughs and small businesses, and then all of a sudden, the oft-stated, there's no such thing as a magic money tree, all of a sudden appeared because money is not a thing. It's not a substance. It is a concept that creates liquidity, which enables people and businesses to transact with one another. It is created primarily by the banking system with the assistance of central banks. And it is up to people themselves to try and understand the profound difference between an individual and a family's position with regard to constraints and economy constraints, which are very different.
So we're beginning to understand, or so I'm seeing. Thatcher's equation of national budget with household budget wreaked untold damage in European popular political thought. I understand that now. Statistics can be very misleading sometimes and presented to shape certain views. Well, I certainly do that, Gary. I think we all do that, don't we? I agree.
There's a very famous book from the 1950s that I would highly recommend. It's just called How to Lie with Statistics. And it's a delightfully simple read, and then you will recognize things that you encounter in newspapers and news broadcasts almost daily in your life. And you will. My mother handed it to me when I was, I think, 12. And
amazing! What incredible parenting! I agree that helicopter money is necessary to restart the economy and will be paid in the end by the better economy. Okay, so that's more in line with how you're thinking about this, Kate, by the sound of it. Also, the fact that the reserves of the gold that Portugal had have been chopped at the roots ever since 1975. They found Joel. Come on, Joel. Kate, what are you going to say to him?
I'm going to say gold has nothing to do with money. And politics and your perceptions of that are not colored by kind of careful thought of what's actually going on. You have impressions. And your impressions at the very beginning of my talk with Carl, I had to expose for being incorrect, hugely incorrect. And when you say that all things were better in that period and that this was some sort of agricultural paradise, I just told you what the World Bank said. And I also am telling you that because your own government didn't collect any statistics themselves. They didn't want you to know. But of course, you were young then. And people like when they're young, they have nice, fond memories of when they're young. And so we see this, it's kind of a human tendency. You wouldn't think it would impinge on economic thought or you know, you place your values in your life, but it does.
Okay. It's you really have changed my view of things and some deeply held views. And I think I need you to come back at some other point. Thank you for a very interesting interview from Maxines to UK. There in Belgium, there is some helicopter money for businesses that have to close, and economic unemployment aid is so needed. It's so needed. The EU was hijacked by neoliberalism. Now, this is, yeah, and you were breaking up badly. So apologies to everybody. Bear with us because we are getting some really good information, as well as the occasional technical difficulty. We'll come back to that neoliberal point and the kind of my challenge another one of my sacred cows as well about how I think this is all going to end in tears. But anyway, to help our local economy, I'm thinking of starting a Facebook page called Prato do Dia Castanheiro de Pera, so that local restaurants and cafes can advertise their daily menus. Yes, Peter, and let us copy that throughout the country and support the local powerhouses of the local economies, unless I'm wrong with that as well. Let's get that money spent in the cafes and the restaurants, as is an important part of Portuguese life. Fishing and farming have massively declined under EU membership. Ask any farmer or fisherman, and soon we'll have a massive skill shortage if we don't sort this. We will have to cherry pick a few of these comments and hope that Kate will come back, but I'm sure we can generalize some of the points here if we take all the comments and questions in together here for a moment. I love Zach Bush on his stuff about gut microbes, the soil and glyphosate. It's mind-blowing. So that's a little bit tangential, but I'm sure very interesting as well. Just to say that the Portuguese government is ranked 5th in Europe on political corruption. No question about that, but we've got to be careful what we're collapsing together here. We are talking about economics. We're talking about, and its intersection with politics and human nature. All of these things, they do need to be separated. When I lived in the Netherlands, I was amazed by their sustainable farming and how they employ great innovative techniques, as Doreen raised. Oh, this is a whole new program. Does Bitcoin create money? Yikes. And I'd love to have that conversation, but we can't at the moment, I don't think, with the amount of time we've got. I've always said this about the economy and Thatcher, says Penny. The current Tory government continue with the myth. It is not a household economy, that woman. Why do you think that Greece asked for compensation money of the occupation of Nazi Germany in World War II when Greece had Troika, says Joel. Peter Bleach, spot on, Doreen. They are at the height of agricultural innovation. Maxine says, yes, very, very interesting. I feel helpless. That's an interesting sort of quandary and irony to have found something interesting and then helpless afterwards. We'll see what we can do about that. Salazar, a good friend of Franco, Hitler, and Mussolini. Joel needs to remember this. I think, to be fair to Joel, he's very well aware of that. He's not making a case for Salazar, to be fair to my friend Joel in Porto. Kate, I'd love to meet up and talk political economy when I'm back in Leiria and lockdown is relaxed. That will probably only cost you about £500 an hour to talk to a professional economist, but money well spent, I suspect, and you can probably get a loan on that. But no, because you're not a government. During World War II, government debt to GDP ratio was over 300% and fell low to 40%. And by the 70s, 40% sounds wonderful now, not the dire position that was painted by the politicians and the media. The politicians and the media, we haven't really talked too much about them. Well, we've talked a little bit about politicians, but the media, of course, yes, and how they must make your life very difficult, Kate, with the media portrayal. You must feel like a scientist sometimes, how they get skewed and messed up by the media. Governments, the ECB, appear to work on a principle I was told by a very intelligent man. If you owe the bank $500,000, you have a problem. If you owe them 5 million, they have a problem. Banks should not be allowed to continue printing money, in my opinion, says John Hayfield. There has to be a reckoning at some point, rather than kicking the problem down the road for future generations. We'll come back to that for sure.
Misinterpretation.
I knew you'd say that. I do want to address that. When I read *Sapiens* by Yuval Noah Harari, that's a good book that should be read alongside *How to Lie with Statistics*. It blew my mind, an understanding of money and that it is not a substance. And it has done the most amazing things for us, money, absolutely, in the way that Kate's talking about it. East London Kiwi, I'd be interested to hear what the EU Union are planning with regards to the ability to earn an income during a time when skills are being replaced by the ever advancement of tech and automation. We all would, absolutely, East London Kiwi. This is something we should keep our eye on. No, I'm not saying it is better. All I'm saying is that the economical stability of the government was far more stable before the new government after the... Yeah, there you go. It's not a defense of Salazar. Let's be fair to Joel here. Kate's been great. She should do a 101 on economy and money for beginners. We've begun that here today. Make the page, Peter, make the page. We have those where I live called Save Our County Restaurants. It has helped them a lot. Let's do that, Pete. Let's get the whole of Expats Portugal behind that, helping out the cafes and restaurants of Portugal. Peter in New Zealand, they took that idea one step further, where you can buy restaurant credit for future purposes, giving cash injections. This is people behaving like economists and supporting their local businesses. Fantastic. Gary Austin, up until Nixon, changed the rules in 1970? Wasn't everything based on the exchange rate, based on American gold? What was that famous agreement called?
The Bretton Woods Agreement.
The Bretton Woods. Yeah. What am I saying? What I'm saying is that the economy would be more stable if the government had more control of it on its spending and not exceed on frivolous luxuries like they can constantly pull off. Okay, we get where you're at, Joel, and we are running out of time. We've gone into past the 10 o'clock threshold, and I'm so grateful for so many of you still being here, having this fascinating conversation with Kate here. The big elephant in the room one for me is now that we've discovered that the like a country's economy is not like a domestic one. Thank you for that. What about this fear then that it's all going to end like the 1930s? Because a lot of people with their possibly sort of media, social media, infused grasp of economics, like myself, subject to the occasional economic conspiracy theory, and the likes of Max Kaiser, the Kaiser Report, and these doom mongers who say it's being blown up, it's the money's being printed, the quantitative easing is all going to end in a massive crash. Is that not true, Kate?
I think that is highly highly unlikely. The circumstance we are in right now is that we're actually battling with deflation. What the targets are for Europe, for the UK, the US, everywhere, what you want to see is something around 2% inflation. And we haven't seen that. We haven't seen that in Portugal for some years. And in fact, at the present, you have negative inflation, which is deflation. It's dangerous. It stops people from purchasing things because they think, well, why purchase it today if it's going to be cheaper in the future? So what central banks have been trying to do, in fact, since the global financial crisis, is try and get some inflation back in the system. A little bit of inflation is very important because it kind of greases the wheels of change in the economy. You need to have a little bit of price motion so that when the composition of your economy is changing, there is some leeway there. I don't want to get too technical about this, so you'll have to trust me a little. But you really do want some inflation. And our problem is in the EU, we're not getting inflation. And so one of the reasons that central banks feel very comfortable with doing quantitative easing is, first of all, governments themselves have not been doing enough fiscal stimulus. And so there's central bank lending and purchases of bonds is the only game in town. In fact, many governments around the world, not just Portugal, have been lax in their responsibility to use fiscal policy to get more money in people's pockets so they can spend it. Yeah. You've seen this all over. And to the extent that we get more fiscal stimulus, which is what the EU is trying to do in its forthcoming Net-Zero plan, is hopefully going to be hugely helpful in getting us back to normal inflation, at which point they can turn off the program, so to speak. They don't have to keep going once the economies are operating in a more normal inflationary environment. Until then, that stimulus has been a godsend in many cases. It's obviously had some unanticipated negative effects. And the main one, from my point of view, being that those of us that own portfolios of shares and bonds,
sadly, I think you're breaking up again there, Kate.
We've made.
Go
Sorry.
on.
I was just saying that.
It's not your fault.
The biggest beneficiaries have been people with large portfolios of stocks and bonds. So quantitative easing has had the unfortunate side effect of making the rich richer.
This is our great problem, isn't it? This really is our great problem, and I get that. I think everybody gets that. They understand that that's what's happening. The rich get richer, and this is not a problem of economics. This is a problem of human nature, perhaps, or how we structure our societies.
This is because governments would not step up to using fiscal policy, which means government expenditure, to try and keep economies stable and keep money in people's pockets. The central banks have had to step in using the only tools they have. And the only tools they had involved buying bonds and stocks in the market, which increased the value of bonds and stocks. And therefore, people that had portfolios of bonds and stocks benefited because their own portfolios became more valuable. But poor people don't tend to have portfolios of bonds and stocks. So it was, but the whole nature of quantitative easing, it wouldn't have been so key to what's been going on over the past decade if it had been for governments just pulling the plug in terms of their fiscal responsibilities, because they preferred philosophically to stick to Mrs. Thatcher's line.
Yeah, amazing. It's so interesting, and of course, consumer spending, when the money does get pumped into the economy, it's like people who are like spring lambs in the pasture with their money tend to create a new problem, don't they? It's like the very same people probably who would criticize politicians for not being able to manage the economy very well, and who confuse this metaphor of household spending with government spending, then go and get themselves into loads of debt, and then possibly blame the government for creating an impossible situation that they're in. And that's not to say that there is not terrible political mismanagement. There obviously is, but there
I don't see much evidence of that, Carl. I see in countries that I'm familiar with, since I've done a lot more work on the UK and US, Northern European countries, people that have accumulated a lot of debt have tended to do so because it was the only way to maintain their expenditure, the only way to pay the bills.
Absolutely.
And this is very much the case in the UK. It's extremely worrisome. There are a lot of people that have been surviving through borrowing because otherwise they couldn't pay their rent and feed their children and have heating on in the winter. And it is that serious a problem. And that's where most of the consumer debt resides, not in people that decided to go on a spree at Harrods.
The profligacy that they get shamed for publicly by politicians.
Well, it shouldn't be. This is, again, it's a failure of fiscal policy, where you see people that are not supported, sometimes people that have 2 or 3 jobs, but don't even make the minimum wage.
This is Portugal we're talking about.
Social care workers, many of them do not actually make the legal minimum wage in the United Kingdom because they are not paid for their travel in between the appointments. And they're treating people. So there's lots of shocking situations where hard-working employed people have maxed out credit cards because they couldn't survive otherwise. That is not something to criticize people for. That is something to criticize government policy for.
Well said. This has been such an interesting conversation. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kate. It was very interesting. Sejani in Belgium, over in the UK. Very interesting, Kate. Thank you so much. Wowzers from America, from Ree. That was eye-opening, Kate. Hope you come back. I would endorse that. Can you recommend an easy read on modern economies? Is that not a contradiction in terms? I don't know. I have often tried to persuade friends of what you've said, but would love some firm facts to share. Jerry says, oh, it's sorry to keep you, Kate. There's so many wonderful comments coming in. What a great discussion. I've learned a lot this morning. Thanks, Kate. Gary Austin, can we have Yanis Varoufakis on next week? The economy of the EU seems to be torn between countries' economic interests, EU multinational corporations' interests, and Chinese trade. These are cans of worms that we shouldn't open right now, but I hope we can at some point. Bitcoin, China, there are so many more things to say. Can you say or write the name of the book and the author? Catherine is asking. So that's how to lie with statistics, was it?
Yes, How to Lie with Statistics.
And who wrote? Do you recall who wrote it, Kate?
You know what? Just type it into Google and you'll get it immediately. It's not, that brain cell is missing this morning.
Oh, right. Yeah,
I'm only on my second cup of Assam tea.
Portugal being on the sidelines, the fluctuations are felt more here, says Andre. John Hayfield, does just printing money, QE, not devalue existing currencies? Oh, I'm so sorry. We can't get into that right now. The future is debt then. Yes, but depending on how you see that, I guess would be one way of answering that. Please, can Kate do a regular slot? It's been great. Well, damn. Can we get Noam Chomsky on after Yanis Varoufakis? Check us out. That's quite.
Actually, he's going to be addressing our climate change, Oxford climate change group. We've
really
had an international network of people that are involved in trying to get to net zero before 2050, and Noam's going to talk to us in a couple of weeks, so that's kind of exciting.
I have a photograph. My daughter's graduation, Noam Chomsky was the keynote, and I have a lovely picture of my mother stood next to Noam Chomsky. Neither of them knew particularly why, I don't think, but it's a lovely picture nonetheless. Thanks for confirming that the dollar is just a concept. I often tell people that, but they get cross-eyed. Noam Chomsky addressed the launch of Jeremy Corbyn's Justice and Peace Project last Sunday. He was great. He's good value, isn't he, Noam? And Penny, this is a good note to end on, isn't it? To remind us all. I don't know if this is what she meant, but this is to come back into the here and now. It's only money, and all of the truth, knowledge, and love, and everything we ever wanted is in the here and now. I don't know if that's what you were saying, Penny, but now is the time for me to say thank you so much, Kate, and goodbye to you. I hope just for now,
pleasure.
And that you will come back and talk to us, because it's been such an education, and people have enjoyed themselves so much listening to you. So thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Well done on the show. It's very good.
All right, take care. Bye for now. Bye. Yes, we can let Kate go and let you all go. Have a great day. Remember, it's only money and debt and stuff. Let's not take it too seriously, but let's take it seriously enough, obviously. Bye for now.